At 30,000 feet above the Pacific, where the hum of engines was the only sound in a world of clouds, Trans-Pacific Flight 819 fell into an eerie silence that gripped every soul on board. As panic rippled through the cabin, all eyes turned to a 19-year-old girl in row 17, her hands steady on a flight simulator app, her heart racing with a secret she'd never shared. In a moment of crisis, this unlikely hero would take the pilot's seat, proving that courage can soar higher than any altitude. The cabin of Trans-Pacific Flight 819 was a cocoon of soft lights and recycled air. Cruising at 30,000 feet from Los Angeles to Tokyo on July 21, 2025. The red-eye flight was half full, with passengers dozing under blankets or scrolling through in-flight movies. In row 17, window seat Zara Lin, a 19-year-old college freshman, hunched over her phone, her thumbs guiding a virtual plane through a flight simulator game. Her dark hair fell over her eyes and her earbuds played lo-fi beats, drowning out the world. Zara was no ordinary passenger. Raised by her father, a retired Air Force pilot, she'd grown up on stories of dogfights and emergency landings. Though she'd never flown a real plane, she'd logged thousands of hours on simulators, her dad's old software teaching her the basics of aviation. She was headed to Tokyo for a summer coding boot camp, her dream of blending tech with flight simmering. In her mind, at 2:13 a.m., the plane's engine stuttered, a low groan that jolted Zara from her game. The cabin lights flickered and the intercom crackled with static. Passengers stirred, murmuring nervously. Then, silence, absolute, suffocating silence. The engines had stopped. The plane seemed to hang in the air, its glide path eerily smooth. Zara's heart raced as she pulled out her earbuds. A flight attendant, Maria, hurried down the aisle, her face pale but professional. "Stay calm, everyone," she said, her voice tight. "We're handling it." But the panic was palpable. Passengers gripped armrests. A child whimpered, and a man in a suit muttered prayers. Zara leaned toward the aisle, catching Maria's eye. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice steady despite her pounding pulse. Maria hesitated. "The pilots, they're not responding. We're trying to reach them." Her words sent a chill through the cabin. Passengers gasped and a woman in row 16 whispered, "Are they dead?" Maria and another flight attendant, Javier, knocked on the cockpit door, their urgency growing. No response. The plane, on autopilot, glided silently, but without engines. It was only a matter of time before it lost altitude. Javier used an emergency code to open the cockpit, and what they found sent them reeling. Captain Ellis and First Officer Patel were slumped over the controls, unconscious, likely from a sudden cabin pressure issue or oxygen failure. The cockpit's systems blinked erratically, the autopilot struggling to maintain stability. Back in the cabin, panic erupted. A businessman shouted, "Someone do something!" A mother clutched her son, sobbing. Zara, her simulator app still open, felt a surge of adrenaline. Her dad's voice echoed in her mind. In a crisis, focus on what you can control. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her 512 frame belying her resolve. "Maria!" Zara called, weaving through the aisle. "I know how to fly, at least on simulators. I can try to help." Maria turned, her eyes wide with skepticism but desperation. "You're a kid," she said, but Javier, overhearing, grabbed her arm. "We've got no one else. The radio's out and we're losing altitude. Let her try." Passengers stared. As Zara followed Maria and Javier to the cockpit, their murmurs a mix of hope and doubt. A man in a tracksuit scoffed, "She's gonna save us? She's barely out of high school." But Zara ignored him, her focus razor-sharp. The cockpit was a maze of blinking lights and screens, far more complex than Zara's simulator. Captain Ellis and First Officer Patel were slumped in their seats, breathing shallowly. Javier and Maria moved them to the cabin, where a nurse passenger began administering oxygen from emergency tanks. Zara slid into the pilot's seat, her hands trembling but steadying as she scanned the controls. The altimeter showed 28,000 feet and dropping. The autopilot was engaged, but the engines were offline and the plane was in a slow descent. Zara's training kicked in. She checked the fuel gauges, plenty left. The engine failure wasn't mechanical. It was likely an electrical glitch or oxygen issue affecting the pilots. She flipped switches, following her dad's old checklist. Fuel, ignition, restart. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. "Come on," she muttered, her fingers dancing over the panel. Maria, standing behind her, relayed updates to the cabin. Via intercom. "We have someone working on the controls. Stay seated and calm." Her voice shook, but Zara's focus was unbreakable. She tried the restart sequence again, and this time a low hum vibrated through the plane. One engine roared to life, then the second. The cabin erupted in cheers, but Zara wasn't done. The plane was still losing altitude, and the autopilot was GLITCHING. Zara disengaged the autopilot, gripping the yoke. Her simulator hours had taught her the feel of a plane, but this was real 30 tons of metal and 120 lives in her hands. "Maria, get me a radio," she said. Javier handed her a headset, and she hailed air traffic control. "Transpacific 819, we've got an emergency. Pilots down, engines back online, but I'm not a pilot. Need guidance to land." "The controllers." Voice crackled through. "Transpacific 819, this is Honolulu Control. You're 200 miles out. Can you maintain altitude?" Zara checked the instruments. "I'm trying." 25,000 feet, climbing slowly. The controller, calm but urgent, guided her through stabilizing the plane, adjusting flaps and throttle for 20 tense minutes. Zara followed the controller's instructions, her hands steady on the yoke, her mind racing through her dad's lessons. Passengers, strapped in, were silent, their trust in the girl from row 17 absolute. Maria and Javier relayed her calm commands, keeping panic at bay. The nurse reported the pilots were stable, but not conscious enough to help as Flight 819 approached. Honolulu, the runway lights glinted through the clouds. Zara's heart pounded, but she focused on the controller's voice. "Line up with runway 8L, descend to 10,000 feet. Reduce speed to 180 knots. She adjusted the controls, the plane responding sluggishly but obeying. Sweat beaded on her forehead as the ground neared. The landing was rough wheels screeching, the plane bouncing, but it held the runway. Emergency crews swarmed, guiding the aircraft to a stop. The cabin erupted in applause, passengers sobbing with relief. Zara exhaled, her hands shaking as she powered down the systems. Maria hugged her, tears streaming. "You did it, Zara." Paramedics rushed the pilots to a hospital, diagnosing oxygen deprivation from a faulty cockpit seal. Zara, still in row 17's hoodie, was mobbed by passengers thanking her. A news crew, alerted by air traffic control, waited at the gate, their cameras capturing Zara's shy smile. By morning, her story was trending on X with #row17hero. Clips of passengers praising her courage going viral. Transpacific offered Zara a scholarship to flight school, recognizing her potential. Her dad, watching the news from his Seattle home, called her, his voice thick with pride. "You were born for this, kiddo." Zara, overwhelmed but grounded, knew her life had changed. The skies, once a virtual playground, were now her calling. In Honolulu's dawn light, Zara Lynn stood taller, the girl from row 17 who turned silence into salvation. At 30,000 feet, she'd found her wings, proving that heroes can rise from the most unlikely seats.